first thing I'm going to do is have a really good look at my reference image and use my colour isolators, which are little pieces of paper with a punch. You might prefer to use a black one. I prefer to use a white one. I've tried black. Black works well if you're using a screen, but I generally use white, and it's just a slightly oversized. You can just use a normal hole punch, and I bought myself a little craft punch, which makes a slightly bigger hole, which is quite good when you're working with bigger areas of colour. So I have a colour isolator in my hand, and I'm going to paint the second part. So I've already done the first part up here of the second layer. The first layer I've done on this was a yellow underwash, which I do underneath any warm colours that I'm going to do over the top, because it just gives it a lovely glow, particularly with florals, a lovely glow. So there's a yellow underwash on here. I've left the highlighted parts of the petals, the whites or the pale lilacs or grey areas, I've left them white. So and I've done the first part. What I'm going to do now on another area, I've already done that on the top part of this peony. So I'm going to start, I start left to right, because then if I've got wet paint in one area, I'm not dragging my hand through it when I paint another area. So I always start on the left. I'm sorry for the left-handed people. It makes it a little bit more tricky for you, but you can always turn your paper around. So I'm going to paint this quarter, I guess you'd call it. I've done that quarter. I'm going to do this quarter. I'm not going to go petal by petal. I could do, but that's not the effect I want. I want a soft effect, and so we'll use more water and paint more. So I'm looking at the colours I'm going to need here, and looking at it in reference to my colour chart that I created earlier, and I can see all these colours popping up in here that I'm going to need. So I know I'm going to need to mix all three of these colours, just like I did for this, to achieve these colours, with a lean to pink and a lean to orange as I go. So I'll mix up some colour, and I'll use a not too big a brush for that. This is a number 8. So I've got a dirty patch there from my red, so I'll do the same thing again. When I'm mixing colour, I quite like having it close to where the source of it is on the on my palette. So I mix yellows up at that end, and I mix reds up at this end, so to speak, because the reds are here and the yellows are there. Simple as that. But you can mix anywhere, and what happens is you tend to run out of space. I'm just cleaning some space with for those clean colours with my with tissue, which is off screen. My buckets are to my right, off screen as well, at a height that is working for me. So we'll pick up some transparent yellow and some raw sienna, and make a nice puddle of reasonably dense colour. You can see what it's like. It's not a big puddle, because I don't need too much yellow. I'll just add a drop of water there, rinse off my brush, and pick up some quinacridone red, which is a very grunty colour. And I've got plenty of blue on my palette there. So I'm looking here, and I've got a mix of lovely subtle colours. So I've already got some mix here. So I'm going to add some red to that colour there, a bit more. So I've got a lovely dull burgundy, I suppose you'd call it. And rinse off my brush. And then I'll pick up some more blue and put it in the middle here, and pull some yellow into that. So you don't have to have perfect puddles all the time. It ends up all over the place. So there's a more pinky orangey colour that's in the back there. It needs a little bit more blue. So you can see that that's a bit more peachy than this colour here. What else have I got? I've got just some nice clean pinks too. So I'll just put a little bit of this up here, just leave it clean. I'll just add a little tiny drop of blue only. That just cools it down a bit. So there I've got some nice colours, and I can always mix up more along the way. They're strong enough to leave, I'm going to paint wet on wet, so they're strong enough to leave a, just add a little bit more blue to that, make that a little bit stronger, that colour. Here's my quinacridone ground red. I did say that I was going to use permanent rose in this as well, but I think we can actually probably get away without using it. And a little bit more blue. I'm just scraping off my brush just to save my pigment before I wash it off. Right, so I've got my colours ready. Then I'm going to pick up my number 20. You could use a 12 or a 14, whatever you've got really. And we're going to wet. So really clean water. You can't see my water, but it's a fresh 3 litre bucket of clean water. And I'm going to look. So I want to keep my highlights. I don't want to paint. I don't want to wet my highlighted areas. So I'm going to leave this and this. And where it's white on here, I'm not going to paint water. Except what I would call dull highlights. So I'm going to leave this little piece here white. So look at your reference image. I'm going to leave this white. And I'm going to leave this up here white. Even though I've got some yellow here, I'll leave this white for now. And I might add some colour over that yellow. And I'm going to wet all the way down to this petal here, which has got a white edge. And that's going to be my bottom edge. And all the way over to the edge of the yellow here on that petal. Okay, so off I go. So I'll just do that as quickly as I can, because it's like watching paint dry, watching somebody paint water on. So I'm painting around that little bright white piece there and down to the bottom there. And I'm just going to flick up with water so it's an uneven edge up to the white, but this is all dry still. And then I'm going to paint the edge to that white petal at the bottom. So that's my bottom edge. And wet that. So plenty of water, like so. I've gone over that edge slightly, so it's going to be a slightly different shaped petal there at the bottom. And right into here. Leaving that as a clean edge at the bottom there too. So all of this is wet. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfect in terms of the shapes that you've shaped around or left. It'll become evident when you're painting if you need to wet anything more. You better to put these on and wet further. Okay, so I've got a number 8 brush. It's a 401, Rosemary 401. So one of my favourite workhorse brushes. So I'm going to start at the top and have a look at what the colours are. I don't know whether you can see my reference image on there. I'll just move everything slightly to the side so you can see where I'm pointing. You don't need to see my brushes. Right, I think you can probably see okay now. So I always have a little sheet of paper tucked underneath my palette so I can test my colour. So I can go like that. And I'm looking at my reference image. I'll put it here so you can see. And I'm looking for these colours in here, what they are, what these shapes are. And they're this lovely dark purpley kind of colour. So I'm going to work my way down and put little blobs of paint where those colours are. So there's some under here. And I'm just using the tip of my brush and a stroke to drop those colours on. There's a dark colour in there, a little bit more pigment on there, and a little bit of pigment at the top here. And then there's a sweep. So I'm just going to do a well-directed sweep there, and it's going to bleed over that white a bit, but it doesn't matter because it's not really white in the picture. And I've just made a mess of that. But it doesn't matter too much. So just looking for the darks in here. We've chosen the colour, we're looking for the darks. So you can see how loose that is. Put that on there. Then I'm going to keep going with that colour. I'll add a little bit more blue because it's a little bit darker and duller down here. And just look for shapes. There's a shape that goes like that in there. And then underneath that part, which we'll do on the second layer. So you're just looking for shapes. And what I didn't add is some Potter's Pink. So I'll put some Potter's Pink into that mix because it's the right colour, but it's also got a lovely granular effect. and over there. So you're creating rough shapes with this process. And then down here, this is the very bottom edge, so I'm going to have a sharp edge here, although I went over the edge, so most of it's going to be sharp. So I've just used one colour there so far. Touch there. And maybe I'll add a little bit of this brighter colour, go back to where I started and just drop in a little bit of that brighter colour there. You can influence the colour by just dropping some more in later. Yeah, I'm happy with that. If you paint, put paint on and it goes too far, then it's because the paper's too wet and you have to wait a little bit longer. And you can probably see, I'll just lift this up a bit. You can see these top bits here spread a little bit far. So all I need to do to correct that is pick up a brush, a bigger brush than you use to put the paint on, probably the biggest brush you've got, but about a 14 or a 20. This is a 18. Dry it off on your towel, and just go in and press firmly and sweep the colour off, lift it off, and that tidies up the edge a little bit for you. See that? So I'll do it again here, tidying up the edge, pressure on and lift, really dry brush, and it just bosses them around a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to pick up a bit more red here, and I'm going to go in on the other side of the white bit that I've left, because that's kind of got a nice little clean edge here. And so I'm going with a pinkier, peachier, not so dirty kind of a look now. A couple of little streaks there, and I'm just looking for the colours. So there's a bit of a across here, that's a bit more purple than what I've got it, but I'm just working my way across the paper, and then there's a light streak there. I've actually painted it yellow, but yeah, it doesn't matter too much. We can lift it out a bit later. So this is just general application of colour, I guess. And here's our clean bottom edge here that I've come to. Pick up a bit more pink. That's got a bit of blue in it, because it's cool. It's cool around this side. Now, where something is pointing to the sky, when you're painting a flower or a leaf or anything in nature, it seems, now we'll just create a nice neat edge here, because this is a negative painting the top of the petal underneath. So just some streaky bits here underneath, and we'll do the dark concise layer later, and a bit more pinky blue. So what I started to say, sorry, was where the petal is folded over or curling over and pointing at the sky, the colour will be cooler, because the sunlight pulls out the, now I've hit dry there, so what I'll do is I'll clean brush, 2 swipes on the towel, and I'll just go and soften that edge, because I don't want it a hard edge, but I also want to keep this white up here. So you can pull the water into the colour if you want to too, and then just tidy up the top edge. So that was painting wet on dry, and now I've just softened it. Now there's a little bit of shape up in here. So now that I've finished this colour, I'm just going to dampen this area up here, and then with quite a bluey pink, purpley pink, but it's a dull colour. So I'm just mixing up colour there. I don't want it as strong as that. Take some paint off on my brush. I'm just going to do this and this, and it just forms that crinkle in the leaf. And then over here I can see there's some more purpley bits, but it doesn't have to be identical. A bit more purple in there, and a bit more purple in there, and I'll just soften that off with a brush. And maybe I'll just do another sweep of purple in there, and it just will make that petal roll into that wet. So I've kept my highlights. There's no definition of one petal to another really, other than this little white bit here. It's white out there, and it stops here, and it stops there. But we've actually painted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 petals all in one, just by looking for the shapes and where the colour is. Now if you look at that now and think, oh, I've covered up too much space and you want to lift some of those light lines up there, you can use a round brush if that's all you've got. You can use a round brush like this, and I'll show you what I mean. And you can rinse it off in clean water and really dry it, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wipes on your towel to dry it, tap it dry, and then go in to where it's still damp and put your brush down where you want it to be. Lots of pressure, push down really hard and lift. See how it lifted that out? Now you'll get a smaller lift line using a finer brush like this. But if you haven't got one, you can do a good job with this. It can be an acrylic, it can be a mix. So I'm going to do a few more of those, and it just lifts those lights out. And I'm going to come down here and just create a bit more shape down there. And another little lift here. But so I'm drying my brush off really well. I'll move it into the camera so you can see. I'm drying it off really well. Make sure it's got a nice shape, and then I'm going to go in and lift. And it just lifts that colour off. But you must make sure it's really dry. If you go in with a wet brush, you're going to drop water on there and it's going to push the colour away, and you end up with a blossom. And you kind of got to wait for that to dry and tidy it up and start again. So it's really important that your brush is really dry. So that's all for now.